All right, Madam City Clerk, do we want to go ahead and call the roll and call us to order?
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Tibbetts.
Here.
Councilmember Schwedhelm.
Here.
Councilmember Sawyer. Councilmember Fleming. Councilmember Alvarez.
Present.
Vice Mayor Rogers.
Present.
Mayor Rogers.
Here.
Councilmember Sawyer, have you joined us? Councilmember Fleming, have you joined us? Okay, let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Fleming and Councilmember Sawyer.
Great, thank you. Council, before we begin, we'll do our traditional housekeeping. Just as a quick reminder, keep your audio on mute unless you are speaking. Staff will remain muted until they need to speak as well. As members of the public join the meeting, they'll be participating as attendees. Their microphones and cameras will be muted, and only today's panelists will be viewed during the meeting. If you're calling in from a telephone and choose to speak during the public comment portion of today's agenda, for privacy concerns, the host will rename your viewable phone number to resident with the last 4 digits of your number. And the City of Santa Rosa is committed to creating a safe and inclusive environment free from disruption. We will not tolerate any hate speech or actions and are well staffed to monitor that everyone is participating respectfully. Otherwise, they will be removed. Now, Madam City Clerk, could you please walk through for the public how they might better engage during public comment portions of today's meeting?
Yes, after each agenda item is presented, the mayor will ask for council comments and then open it up for public comment. The host in Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for the agenda item. Once the mayor has called for public comment, the mayor will announce for the public to raise their hand if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. If you are calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. The mayor will then call on the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes and a timer will appear on the screen for the council and the public to see. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will play voicemail public comments. If you provide a live public comment on an agenda item, but also submitted an email, e-comment, or recorded a voice message public comment, your email, e-comment, or voice message public comment will not be duplicated, read, or played during the meeting. Additionally, there are 2 public comment periods on today's agenda to speak on non-agenda matters at item 13 and 17. This is the time when any person may address the council on matters not listed on the agenda, but which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council.
Great, thank you so much. And with that, Mr. City Manager, let's go on to our study session.
Yes, item 3.1, water and wastewater cost of service study, proposed fiscal year 21-22 through fiscal year 24-25 rate schedule, and proposed update to water shortage charges. Jennifer Burke, Director of Santa Rosa Water, leading us off.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Rogers and members of the council. As City Manager mentioned, I am Jennifer Burke and the Water Department Director. We are pleased to be here to provide a study session to the council on our proposed 4-year rate schedule, as well as an overview of our financial strategy during a water shortage, which is required as part of our water shortage contingency plan. The proposed rate structure before you is the culmination of 2 years of work by Water Department staff, including the development of a 10-year financial model and an engineering evaluation of our catastrophic reserves. The proposal before you also represents approximately 6 months of work by the Board of Public Utilities, closely reviewing the initial recommendations and providing feedback, using the board's input and direction, as well as concerns from the council and the board about the impacts of COVID on our community and customers, we were able to develop a modest rate recommendation that takes into account current impacts while still assuring a reliable and resilient water and sewer utility, as well as wastewater treatment. In particular, we were able to reduce our first year water and wastewater rate recommendation, considering the impacts the community is facing due to COVID. With me this afternoon is Kimberly Zanino, our Deputy Director of Administration, and Bob Reed, one of our rate consultants. Deputy Director Zanino will start off today's presentation covering the impacts to the Water Department billing and what we are doing to assist our customers in relation to the pandemic. And then Bob Reed will cover the rate study, our cost of service study, our rate recommendation, and our water shortage rate recommendation. I will then wrap up the study session covering the outreach plan that we have implemented to date and the next steps for the rate recommendation. So now I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Director Zanino.
Can you move to the next slide, please? This is just an agenda showing you what we will go over. Director Burke has already covered this. I will talk about COVID-19 pandemic billing update, and then Bob will be taking you through the rate recommendation, the study, and the water shortage contingency plan in relation to water shortage rates. Next slide, please. Thank you. So prior to moving this presentation over to our rate consultant, Bob Reed, we wanted to share some information on how Santa Rosa Water has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the effects to billing and revenue. In March of 2020, when the shelter-in-place orders began around the state, a moratorium on shutting off water for non-payment was put into place. Santa Rosa Water has complied with that mandate, and in addition, restored any water services that had been shut off prior to the order. This has created some challenges for us. As with all other water providers, this process is used as a tool that puts us in a position to keep customers from getting so far overdue that they can never catch up. Many times it's just the start of the notification process that gets customers to reach out so that we can work with them to develop payment plans to get them current or to a manageable status. In addition to suspending shutoff processes, Santa Rosa Water also discontinued charging delinquent fees to our customers at the same time. We have also implemented processes for customers to make payment arrangements that are outside of our normal payment plan terms. We allow them to make any terms they are able to commit to. There has also been increased outreach for the Help to Others program, making customers aware of the program, the qualifications to participate, and how to apply. And lastly, city staff is monitoring any state or federal programs that may provide assistance to our customers, as well as working with the county and our regional communities to stay informed on the possible bill assistance that may become available and how we as providers will be able to help customers with program participation. Next slide, please. We also wanted to make you aware of the work being done to address the tracking of customers and bills that are overdue. To start, there have been some constraints on how and what we can track based on how our billing system is set up. Our system, by design, is set up for our policies and practices, which did not allow customers to become overdue by more than 90 days. And therefore, tracking customers at that level is data that would never have been tracked or collected for reporting purposes. Modifying the system is not a consideration to accommodate the current situation, since it is expected that we will return to normal business at some point. And changes to policies and procedures would need to be considered and approved prior to designing or redesigning the system. Core system changes are also very costly and time intensive, and we would never want to make any changes without a thorough evaluation. So therefore, we have found ways to work around the system. First, payment plans, which are a large part of our collections process during normal operations, are tracked and automated. If customers make arrangements and then do not keep them, the process for notification of disconnection is automatically started in the system. Because this process is suspended, currently arrangements with customers are being handled manually. In addition, We have made modifications to the internal reports that allow us to identify the number of accounts in the over 90-day arrearage state and their total balances. What we have been able to determine with the modifications to the reports is that roughly 1,700 accounts are more than 90 days overdue, and that the total balance of these accounts is $1.4 million. I would, however, like to give some perspective to those numbers. The 1,700 accounts are approximately 3% of our customer base, which is not outside of our normal range of overdue accounts. This means the majority of our customers are paying their bills in a timely manner. As for the total balance, we can't compare it to prior years because accounts would not have been able to be overdue by that amount of time. So the perspective I can give you or provide is that it is approximately 1% of our revenue. And the tracking of this data was developed for several purposes, one of them being to make sure that it is not creating an unmanageable financial burden on the current budget, which it is not at this point. Even if this were to become a revenue loss, Santa Rosa Water would remain financially stable and budget would be sustainable because of higher than projected water sales due to higher customer use this year and existing fund balance coverage. I do, however, want to point out that this is not considered a revenue loss. The customers still owe the balances, and Santa Rosa Water will make every effort to collect the amounts due. With our restrictive regulations on our rates, we cannot just forgive account balances. So we will continue to work on the collection and helping customers with assistance that may become available to them. Currently, we continue to bill customers monthly for those amounts, as well as make monthly reminder calls that the bills are overdue and to please contact us. We will have to come up with some solutions on how to collect the funds after the moratorium is lifted, which we are already working on. We are looking at options to create a collections process for the arrearages separate from the current charges that will allow us to return to normal business practices. Another reason to collect the data was to help with industry tracking and evaluation. That is being done by many state and national water associations that are working to provide input on legislation and relief bills. And then finally, we also felt it was very important to begin to identify which customers and the number of customers that we may be able to help with assistance programs as they become available. And that concludes my update on the COVID-19 response. And I will now be turning the presentation over to our rate consultant, Bob Reed.
Good afternoon, Mayor Rogers, members of the council. It's a pleasure to be able to present this information to you this afternoon. If we could move to the next slide, please. I'm going to start this presentation talking about the general water and wastewater rate study that's been conducted over the last couple of years. This is looking at the rates necessary for normal operations. And then subsequent to that, we'll talk about water shortage conditions and steps taken with the water rates to help mitigate water shortage conditions and the financial impacts of that. For the general rate study, the rate study is generally comprised of three main elements. The first is to identify the revenue requirements. This is the amount of revenue needed on an annual basis to cover the operations and maintenance, the debt service obligations, the capital improvement programs associated with utilities, as well as maintaining prudent financial reserves and taking into account other revenue sources to the utilities. To do this, we develop a 10-year financial plan where we're looking not only at the current year and the current needs, but also looking out into the future for a 10-year planning period. This helps us to anticipate things that may come up, and it also allows us to smooth the rate increases out over an extended period of time to help avoid any rate shock or spikes. The second part of the analysis is the cost of service analysis, and this is where once we've defined the revenue needs, we take the costs and we allocate them out to different customer classes and the different rate components based on the service demands of the customer base. So we look at the number of accounts by customer class, the meter sizes, which is an indicator of the potential demand that customers can place on the system. We also look at water use characteristics and peaking characteristics. We also look at wastewater flows and the different types of wastewater flows, the strength characteristics, and going through the wastewater analysis. So this is a way of assigning the costs out to all the different customer classes. And then finally, we go through a rate design process. And within this study, we're not making any significant changes to the rate structures at all. We're just really updating the cost of service analysis and reflecting the revenue needs of the utilities. The next slide, please. So this is a simple schematic that shows the financial plan and the different funds and reserves associated with both the water and the wastewater utilities. And on the left side, we have the revenue sources. Water and wastewater rate revenues, user rate revenues are the primary source of revenue. There are some other revenues, interest earnings, demand fees, other miscellaneous fees and charges. And then also for capital improvement program, there are debt proceeds, loan and grant proceeds also that get factored into the analysis. And then the utilities are covering operating and maintenance costs, meeting your debt service obligations on long-term debt, and then also spending money to rehabilitate and upgrade the water and wastewater systems through a variety of capital projects. There are also some designated reserves primarily associated with debt obligations. Next slide, please. So some of the highlights of this study, one of the real significant things that happened just a few months ago was the issuance of new long-term debt with the wastewater system. And this provided new money for the regional wastewater system and providing about $70 million for the ultraviolet project at the treatment plant. It was also an opportunity because interest rates were at historic lows, have been, to refinance some of your existing long-term debt. And so with that is going to save ratepayers and the wastewater utility about $16 million over the next 14 years in interest costs. So really took advantage of market conditions in the financial markets to save some money as well as to provide the funds needed for this UV project that's coming up. Also during the course of this study, Santa Rosa Water had another consultant look at catastrophic reserve needs. And we've looked at that information and incorporated recommendations for the water and the local wastewater catastrophic reserves. Based on those recommendations, the recommendations for the sub-regional or the regional wastewater treatment system are still being reviewed. And so we've got a placeholder for that, but have not reflected that completely. And then we went through, as I mentioned, the cost of service analysis associated with water and wastewater, updated the rate calculations. And as part of this, I suppose one change that we are recommending is the elimination of the automatic pass-through associated with purchasing treated water from Sonoma Water. That's been something that's been in place for a number of years, but Sonoma Water has also become much more unpredictable in terms of their changes, and to build in anticipated increase in that cost into the rate schedules that are being developed will save the city from some of the administrative costs and so on associated with those automatic annual adjustments, and also provide greater certainty for the customers in terms of what the rates will be for the next few years. So it seemed to be a good change to make at this point in time. Next slide, please. So back to the catastrophic reserves. For the water utility, the current reserve is about $5.75 million, and the recommendation from your engineering consultant is to increase that to $17.5 million. Currently, there are cash reserve balances, undesignated balances that could be used to fill up that bucket, if you will, to fully fund that catastrophic reserve. That's not being done at this point, but as part of looking at updating the reserve policies, that is an opportunity. But for our financial analysis, there are sufficient funds to meet that new water catastrophic reserve target. For the wastewater utility, the current catastrophic reserve is $6.8 million, with a recommendation to increase that to $21.5 million. Another significant increase. Between existing reserves and the favorable debt financing that you just went through. There's sufficient cash also to fund that reserve if that is a decision that's made. Again, actually moving that money will be for a future decision consistent or at the time that the policy is being brought forward to the City Council. For the regional wastewater system, the current reserve is $1.7 million. Again, you've got a preliminary recommendation from your engineering consultant, but that's going through review. There'll probably be some discussions with the other user agencies for the regional wastewater system. And so we've put a placeholder of $10 million into our models, but that's a preliminary number and subject to change. But we felt it was a reasonable recommendation to include at this time. And then the geysers catastrophic reserve recommended increase to go from 1.25 to 3.3 million, and we've got that reflected in our modeling as well. So as I indicated, there will be recommended updates to the reserve policies coming forward at a future date. And we made some recommendations with staff about broadening the range of potential uses and making other modifications to that policy, including inflating the target levels for inflation each year so that they don't lose their value over time due to inflation. Next slide, please. So this graph is a pretty high level summary of the water financial plan for the water utility. A lot of information here, so I'll step you through this. The top graph here shows revenues and expenses on an annual basis over our 10-year planning period. The stacked bars in blue represent cost to the utility. The lighter blue is annual operating and maintenance expenses, including purchase of treated water. And then you have a small amount of debt with the water utility, and that's the crosshatched part of that stacked bar in the graph. And then money is set aside each year for budgeted capital improvement projects. And so that's the darker blue at the top of those stacked bars on an annual basis. And so you can see the growth over time with each of these costs as we go through this planning period. And then in the background in green are revenues to the utilities. And at the bottom is non-rate revenues. So these are miscellaneous fees and charges, interest earnings, demand fees, and so on that come into the utility. And then the middle shaded green part is the existing rate revenues. And then the lighter green at the top in the background, that triangular wedge, is the increase in revenue coming from adjustments to the rate. So if you don't adjust the rates at all over this planning period, you would just go up to the second part of this shaded area. And you can see as costs increase, we need to increase revenues to continue to match those. The second graph in this slide shows what's happening to the fund and reserves for the water utility. The bottom dash line in red is a minimum operating reserve. This is a level that you would never want to go below. It's providing funds for working capital and cash flow needs and real emergency positions, but we would never plan on going below that. And then the next dash line adds to that the catastrophic reserve target level. And so you can see the increase in the first year, and that's because we're looking at assuming that target reserve level for the catastrophic reserve is funded. And then the blue line in this second graph is showing the end of year balance in the water utility. And you can see for the most part, we're above those target reserves. And as I indicated before, we're not saying that catastrophic reserve would be fully funded at this point in time. You might leave some of that money as undesignated funds, but there is capacity to do that if that decision is made. And then at the bottom of this slide, it shows the annual rate increases, and we've estimated those for the 10-year planning period. Our recommendation is just for rate adjustments for the first 4 years. And over that period of time, enough things will change that you'll want to update the financial plans and recast things out for another 10 years. But you have a sense of what we're looking at over the entire 10-year planning period here. And for the next 4 years, we're looking at a 2%, followed by 2 years of 3%, and then a 4% annual rate adjustments. And then just some statistics at the bottom. You're easily meeting your debt service coverage ratio in each year here, as well as this is indicating the level of capital spending or money being set aside for your capital projects each year, and that gradually creeps up as well over the planning period. We move to the next slide, please. This shows the same information for the wastewater utility. Again, the top graph shows the revenues and expenses. Expenses are in those stacked blue bars. And you can see here that significant more debt for the wastewater utility. Most of the debt is with the sub-regional system, but also some local wastewater debt as well. But this is reflecting both the local wastewater cost, which is essentially the collection system cost to get wastewater to the treatment plant, and then the regional costs are for treatment and reuse of treated wastewater. And then at the very top of this, again, is the capital improvement spending that's planned. The middle graph here, again, we're showing able to meet the reserve targets throughout the planning period here with a little bit of cushion. And you can see throughout the entire 10-year planning period, very nominal rate increases. In fact, we're recommending 4 years at 2%, and then beyond that, we're looking at just 3% or very close to the pace of inflation for the remaining the planning period. And again, debt service coverage is not an issue. You've got plenty of capacity there. You generally need to be required to be above 1.2 or 1.25, and recommended target is to be above 1.5, and you're up at 4.5, 5 times coverage factor. So the debt service obligations is not being overly burdensome, and that's a number the financial community looks at. And then you can also see the capital spending, the reinvestment in the infrastructure at the bottom of this, both for the local wastewater collection system as well as the regional treatment system. Next slide, please. So again, very modest annual rate increases for both the water and the wastewater utilities over the next 4 years. We tried to keep the initial rate adjustments as low as we could because of the pandemic issues and the stresses that's creating in the community. But you can see very modest annual adjustments throughout this planning period. Next slide, please. So the next step is to go into the rate setting and go through the cost of service analysis and the calculation of rates. And here we're looking at various rate setting objectives. One, to make sure we have sufficient revenues, so financial sufficiency and sustainability, and that's really looking at the financial plans and the revenue needs. We need to comply with the legal requirements in rate setting, meeting Proposition 218 requirements, and that is really supported through our cost of service analysis. Encouraging water conservation has been a long-standing objective of the city and the utilities to make sure people are using water efficiently and not being wasteful with a precious resource. And then also looking at revenue stability and predictability, minimizing rate increases over time, and then being sensitive to affordability issues, as well as having a rate structure that the customers understand how it works. And I think we've got a rate structure now. It was simplified a few years ago, and keeping that same rate structure, I think your customers are pretty accustomed to it at this point. Next slide, please. So as we go through our cost of service analysis, there are several principles that help guide us. Certain types of costs are allocated out to customers and through customer classes in different ways. There are what we call customer costs, and these are costs that are assigned to each customer equally on an equal basis. And so I think of things like meter reading, sending out a bill, customer service type costs, those things where it doesn't matter whether you're a single family home or a large business or something else, that those sorts of costs are the same regardless of the type of customer or the amount of water that you may use. And then there are capacity costs. These are assigned to customers on the basis of meter size, and that's a meter size is used in the industry to be an indicator of the type of demand that could be placed on the system by the customer. So a customer with a 4-inch meter is going to pay more in terms of the customer cost or the capacity cost than somebody with a 5/8-inch residential meter. So that's a way to assign costs on a proportionate basis related to a potential demand on the system. And then our commodity costs are those things that we want to recover on the basis of usage. So on water usage or on wastewater flow, which is estimated for residential customers based on winter water use. And then we get into more specific detail for the tiered water rates for residential customers, where we look at where water supply costs and conservation costs are being applied to help us justify the tier rate structure. And then with wastewater, we're also looking at strength characteristics. So some of your businesses will generate higher strength waste, which takes more to treat. And so we have different strength categories for the non-residential customers for wastewater rates. So all of this goes into our cost of service analysis to help us develop the rates. Next slide, please. So this is just a very high level summary of where, how much costs are allocated to each of those major components for both water and wastewater. You can see most of the costs are going to be recovered through the commodity component based on usage, and this helps to encourage water conservation both on the water side and on the wastewater side. And then the next chunk is the capacity costs, which is allocated out based on meter size generally, and then the small component is those customer costs that are allocated out equally to each customer. So this is just a basic summary of how those costs are allocated to those components for each of the utilities. Next slide, please. So I wanted to spend just a moment talking about the water usage rates, and this shows the proposed rates for the upcoming year. And if we start with that center bar for the multifamily and commercial customers, those customer classes will be paying, have been and will continue to pay a uniform usage rate in which all the water is charged at the same amount regardless of usage. And so this is really a blended rate. It reflects all of those commodity costs that we were talking about, water supply, conservation, a whole bunch of general costs that we allocate on the base of usage, and that's that center bar. For single family customers, we have a 2-tier structure, and there are general costs that are included in both of those tiers. But then when we get to water supply costs, we allocate those a little bit differently. Most of your water is treated water purchased from Sonoma Water. We have a little bit of groundwater, which is less expensive to produce than the treated water from Sonoma Water. So we put the benefit of that lower cost water into tier 1. And so that means the water supply component in tier 2 is slightly higher because it doesn't have the advantage of that cheaper groundwater cost. And then we also put water conservation program costs for single family residential customers into tier 2. And that again is to help us provide a little bit of a price signal to customers that are using more water and allocating conservation costs into that tier 2 usage. Some customers will only be in tier 1. Most customers, many customers will go into tier 2, at least in summer months when they're irrigating more, but it really varies from customer to customer. We have a similar structure for irrigation customers. Here it's a 2-tier structure as well. It's a little bit different structure, and here the tier allocations are based on water budgets for each particular customer based on size of the landscape, types of plants, and whatnot. And because of the dynamics and the nature of that, it's a little bit different price differential between the first and the second tier relative to single family. Again, all of this is reflecting the cost of service analysis that's gone into not only the allocation of cost across customer classes, but also to each of the rate components as well. Next slide, please. This slide simply summarizes the current water rates and rate structure and the proposed rates for the upcoming year, just for the first year, so effective in July of 2021. And then the last 2 columns show the dollar change in each of those components as well as the percentage change. And you can see all of these are in the 2 to 3% range in general. There is a little bit of variation, and again, that's a reflection of the cost of service analysis. And I'll also point out that this rate schedule reflects the rates for recycled water You have some irrigation accounts that use recycled water. They also have a two-tier structure, and those rates are reflected here. And then also different service charges. The rates for recycled water are slightly discounted to offset the customer's costs, the customer side costs of having to use recycled water, including signage and having a recycled water manager on site, supervisor looking at the use and so on. And this is all a reflection of policy that the city has had regarding the pricing of recycled water. The next slide, please. This shows the wastewater rate schedule that's proposed for the upcoming year. Again, current rates, proposed rates, and then the change in dollar and percentage terms. Again, these rates are reflecting changes due to the cost of service analysis. The usage rates are going up, and you can see some of the service charges are going down in this case. Again, it's a reflection of updates to the cost of service analysis in the study. I think an easier way to view the effects of the rate structure is with the next slide. If we could move to that, please. What we did was we looked at a number of different customers throughout the service area, different types of customers, a variety of single family homes, low, medium, and high water use, a variety of multifamily apartment situations, and then a variety of different types of businesses, including information on meter size, their water use, their wastewater usage, and so on. And then we show their current bill comprised of water and wastewater charges, and then proposed bill under the new rates for water and wastewater charges. And then the last column here shows the dollar change in those combined bills as well as the percentage change. And you can see that across the board, all of the bills here are in the 1 to 2%, maybe some a little bit over 2%. But you can see this is a sort of a reflection of the fact that that we're not making rate structure changes, that we're seeing some modest changes due to the cost of service analysis, and we have very modest overall rate increases. And so the impact to customer individual bills across the broad spectrum of different users is pretty modest as well. If we go to the next slide, please. This is simply a summary of what a typical residential, single-family residential combined bill for water and wastewater and the different components of that bill in the pie chart. So you see the blue wedges there represent the different elements of the water bill. We have the fixed charge on the left there, and then tier 1 and tier 2 usage. And then the sewer bill is reflected in green with fixed and usage-based charges as well. For this customer using 7,000 gallons of water and 4,400 gallons of wastewater flow as determined by the sewer cap, their current bill is about $148, and you can see that increasing by $2 to $3 to $4 a month with each of the 4 rate adjustments going forward. In the first year, because we are adjusting each component of the water and wastewater bill, not all bills will go up by fixed percentages, but in years 2, 3, and 4, there are no rate structure changes. And so water bills will all go up by 3%, wastewater bills will all go up by 2% in the second year, and similar for years 3 and 4. And if we go to the next slide, please. We also looked around at many of the neighboring communities and what their water and wastewater bills look like for a typical single family home. And so that's shown in this graphic. The blue part of the bar shows water bill, and then the tan or brown shows the wastewater part of the bill. You can see City of Santa Rosa is right in the middle of the pack here, and with the initial rate adjustment, will continue to be in the middle of the pack. I will indicate to you that a number of these utilities also have multi-year rate plans that they're in the middle of, and some of them are even in the midst of a rate update of their own to look at their financial needs. And so many of the communities will gradually adjust their rates on an annual basis. Most of them do have some sort of adjustment on an annual basis, but we believe that you are currently in the middle of the pack and will continue to be in the middle of the pack going forward. And if we move to the next slide, please. So that concludes the presentation related to the general water and wastewater rate study, again, looking at normal water supply and demand conditions and the revenue needs of each of those utilities. And the next part of this discussion is going to be on the water shortage contingency plan, looking at shortage conditions. So if we move to the next slide, the water shortage contingency plan is a component of the city's urban water management plan. This is a state mandated document that's prepared every 5 years. The urban water management plan has comprehensive information about water supplies, water demands, customer base characteristics, as well as information on water conservation activities. And then a part of it included in one of the appendices in detail, but there is what they call a water shortage contingency plan. And that is a section of the urban water management plan that deals with specifically how you would address a drought situation. And as you know, California is subject to droughts from time to time, including potentially the year that we're just moving into. So the state has prescribed certain stages for water shortage and as well as water use reduction goals. And so part of the update to the water shortage contingency plan is to reflect those state guidelines in developing the plan. So we have incorporated that. We've also updated the financial analysis that's associated with the water shortage contingency plan, as well as the water shortage charges and excess use penalties. Both of these are things that are part of your current water shortage contingency plan. It's been part of the utilities, Santa Rosa Water's policies for a number of years now. And again, we were updating those to reflect the current plan, or the new plan coming forward. So if we move to the next slide, please, we'll go into more details. I'm going to focus on the financial aspects of the water shortage contingency plan. I'm sure the urban water management plan and other aspects of the conservation program will be brought to you at a separate time. But I'll be talking specifically about the financial components, in particular because this information needs to be included in the Prop 218 notice that goes out to customers prior to a rate hearing. So this will be part of the rate adoption process. The new water shortage contingency plan for the city has 8 stages of shortage that have been defined. The first stage is a voluntary stage with only voluntary measures associated with it. And that's for a condition or a situation where you're looking for up to 10% water conservation. So fairly nominal target there and could be met likely through voluntary measures. And then we move into mandatory stages of conservation in different levels, different stages here, stage 2 through stage 8. And you can see the use reduction goals associated with each of those stages in the center of this table. The water shortage charge that we'll be describing comes into play starting in stage 2. And this is the first mandatory stage of use reduction goals. And this is to provide a little bit more revenue to cover the financial deficit that's created during a shortage situation. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And then starting in stage 5, there's also an excess use penalty. And this is something that comes into play if people exceed their water allocations. That would also come into play at stage 5. Any customer that doesn't meet those, stay within their allocation, may be subject to an excess use penalty. The penalty would be something that all customers could avoid if they stay within their allocation, whereas the water shortage charge would apply to all water usage. And so everybody would pay a little bit in that water shortage charge if they're using water. We move to the next slide, go into a little bit more detail here. The financial strategy that we developed for the water shortage contingency plan is not just relying on these the revenue from the water shortage charge, but we really looked at a 3-pronged financial strategy to bridge the financial deficit created by a shortage. One is we look at utilizing a part of the financial reserves that are available within the utility. These might be undesignated reserves, or it could be a portion of the catastrophic reserves that could be used to bridge the financial deficit. And in fact, in stage 1, where we wouldn't have that, it's all voluntary measures, we wouldn't have the water shortage charge revenues from that. We would be looking at reaching into our pocket and using some of our available reserves to cover that financial gap. And then starting in stage 2, we'd have that water shortage charge. And then a third prong here would be the opportunity or the ability to defer a part of the capital improvement program as a way of preserving cash. So the 3 prongs of this strategy are to use available cash, to generate some additional cash, and to preserve cash by deferring some capital spending. And again, I'll mention that the excess use penalties, while they might generate some additional revenue, they aren't intended to. If any revenue is generated, they would be used to help defray the costs associated with shortage, replenish the reserves that have been drawn down and whatnot, but we're not planning or anticipating specific revenues from those excess use penalties. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the financial deficit being created with shortage, and what this graph does is show what that financial deficit may look like at different stages of shortage. And this assumes shortages that go on for a year, so a 12-month duration. In a normal supply situation, our revenues and our expenses are generally in balance. And so you can see that in the first 2 bars here in the normal supply, they're in balance. As we move into the different stages, 1 through 8, we have less revenue because we're selling less water, so that revenue's not coming in. Our expenses decline somewhat. We're buying less treated water, for example, but the revenues will decline more than the expenses will. There will also be some additional expenses. You'll probably spend more, put more effort into conservation and outreach activities to help people meet the use reduction goals and so on. So some expenses will go up in a period of shortage. But we went through a financial analysis looking at what happens as both supply and demand are curtailed. And you can see the financial deficit widening as we get into more severe stages of shortage. So our financial strategy is to help bridge that gap. So if we move to the next slide, this really shows that 3-pronged strategy here. And so now we've taken that gap, the difference between revenues and expenses, and we've backfilled it. So that's what's shown in these stacked bars here. In a stage 1 situation with just voluntary measures, as I mentioned before, we would be looking to using available reserves to bridge that gap. And so that's the only component there. When we move into stage 2, we're instituting that capital shortage charge and generating some additional revenue from that. And as we move through the higher stages of shortage, that would generate some additional revenue along the way as well. And then also in that middle green shade part is reduce CIP appropriations, or reducing our spending on capital projects to preserve cash. And that's a 3rd prong. Now there is some discretion between each of these as we go through the different stages. And so what you would actually do at any particular shortage condition would kind of depend on the facts on the ground at the time that occurred. But we are providing this multiple tools in your toolbox, if you will, for managing the shortage situation. So if we move to the next slide, this provides the details of how the water shortage charge, the excess use penalty would work in the rate structure. So the first column of numbers here is simply the water usage rates that are being proposed for this upcoming July, so July 2021, using this as just for illustrative purposes. These water shortage charges would not affect the fixed monthly service charges that all customers pay. It only applies to the usage component of the water bill. And what happens is this water usage charge is effectively an increase in those water usage rates with each different stage. And in stage 2, you can see up at the top here, there would be a 5% water shortage charge. So each of the usage rates would increase by 5%. In stage 3, that would go to 7.5%, stage 4, 10%. And you can see as you work your way across there, the water shortage charges increasing. So as an example, that 597, that tier 1 rate with a 5% a water shortage charge would increase to 627. with that 5% added in. And you can see that with the additional rates as well as you go through stage 4. Things change when we get to stage 5. And this is a stage where allocations of water would be made for each customer. For residential customers, it would be a function of the number of people per household. At least initially at that point, there would also be an allocation for some irrigation water usage as well. When we get out to stage 7 and 8, there may not be provisions for irrigation even. And then for non-residential customers, there would also be allocations. The tier structure that we have for residential and single family and irrigation accounts would be revert to a uniform rate that would be the same as for multifamily and commercial non-residential accounts. So everybody would have the uniform rate, but then it would also create this excess use penalty so that if you stayed within your water allocation, you can see at the bottom here, tier 1 would then become up to 100% of the water allocation for each individual customer would be at that uniform rate. And then if you go over your allocation up to 150%, you pay an initial excess use penalty. This is the tier 2 rate. And in stage 5, that would be a 10% increase over the tier 1 rate. And then in tier 3, if that would apply if you're over 150% of your water allocation, that would be a 20% excess use penalty. So that being applied on top of the tier 1 rate. And then it gets more stringent as you go out all the way to stage 8, where we're looking at water use reduction goals in excess of 50%. Again, those excess use penalties can be completely avoided by all customers simply by staying within the allocations that are given to them. A lot of information in that slide, so but it really provides the details on how this all works. So if we go to the next slide, this sort of summarizes what it really means for a single family residential customer, what all these different charges mean in different stages of water shortage. The top half of this table shows what happens to a single family customer that might in a month, and this might be a typical summer month where they're using 10,000 gallons of water in a July or August time period, say. And so if you go across, look under normal conditions, they would have a service charge, plus their usage charge would be in their bill. Stage 1, this customer that is meeting that use reduction goal through voluntary means is using a little bit less water, no change in the rate structure or the rates, but you see their bill goes down a little bit because they're using less water. When we get into stage 2 and 3 and 4, we start to see the water shortage charge coming into play. And that applies to each unit. That's that little percentage increase in the water usage rates. And that's starting to generate a little bit of additional revenue. And then when we get into stage 5, 6, 7, and 8, we get into excess use penalties. The water shortage charge continues. Because this customer is meeting the water use reduction goals and staying within their water allocation in those high stages, they never pay an excess use penalty. You can see the total water bill in the second to the last column here, and then the change from their normal bill associated with water usage at each of these stages. And you can see those customers that are meeting the use reduction bill, even though they're paying a little bit extra in that water shortage charge, their bill goes down relative to what their normal bill would be with normal usage. And it's because they're using less water that they see that benefit. The bottom half of this table shows what happens if a customer doesn't reduce their water use consistent with the use reduction goals. And here they continue to pay all of the current charges, but also that water shortage charge and even that excess use penalty when you get into stage 5 and above. And you can see some pretty dramatic bill increases, particularly in the latter stages, the more severe stages of shortage. If they don't reduce their water use consistent with the needs of the city at that time. So I think the real takeaway from this slide is if you're meeting your use reduction goals, customers will see lower bills than they would normally have as a result of this strategy. But if you're not cutting back to help the city get through the shortage situation, they could be paying some additional money. So if we move to the next slide. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Director Burke at this point in time to wrap things up.
Thank you. So we wanted to finish up the presentation with providing some information on the outreach campaign that we've implemented to date, and then talk about next steps with our rate proposal. So we have developed and implemented a comprehensive multimedia outreach campaign. We really wanted to showcase the value of the services that we provide to the community and highlight the investment required to maintain our critical systems and the programs that we implement to enhance and protect our environment. Initially, we had planned on a lot of in-person meetings and information sharing, but we quickly pivoted to a virtual campaign. And so we are using all of the digital and written tools that are available to us and listed on this slide, including 3 videos that hopefully you've seen through various social media outlets, but we can also share at some point, that really highlight what we do, the service that we provide, and the importance of investing in our infrastructure. If we go to the next slide, this campaign is then going to pivot and transition to focus directly on our 4-year rate proposal. The setting of water and wastewater rates must comply with Proposition 218. This requires us to provide a mailing to all customers and property owners, informing them of the proposed rates 45 days prior to a public hearing. And the notice must also let them know how they can participate and when the public hearing will take place. We are planning to mail the Prop 218 notice later this month, and we have currently set the public hearing to occur at your meeting on May 25th. If we go to the next slide, I also wanted to acknowledge and recognize the work that your board has done on the recommendation before you. We worked specifically with the Board of Public Utilities Budget Subcommittee. They met with us 4 times to review and provide input on the process and the recommendation that is before you today. Based on their input, we did make changes, and it has resulted in the recommendation that is before you today. The BPU also, as a full board, reviewed this in study session on February the 4th, and then they unanimously recommended the 4-year rate schedule and water shortage charges that are in front of you today. If we go to the next slide. So as part of the study session today, we're here to answer any questions that the council may have and receive any direction on this rate recommendation. If there is support, then we will send out the notice later this month. If there's questions or things we have to come back to council on, we are prepared to come back on at your next meeting on March 16th if needed. Sorry, that's a typo. The 23rd is a typo. Apologize for that. So if we go to the next slide. So what we're here today, again, just a summary. We're here to answer any questions and get direction on the recommendation. This is the 4-year rate recommendation for the water and wastewater, both the fixed and usage charges. And then also we'll be putting out information on the water shortage charges and excess use penalties as presented earlier today. If we are get approval to move forward, then we will be putting out the Prop 218 notice later this month, and then we're coming back to the council for consideration of this recommendation through a public hearing process on May the 25th. And with that, that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Great, thank you so much, Director. Council, who wants to start? Any questions? Councilmember Sweathelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that presentation, all who did that. Jennifer, the first question I have regarding the water shortage, what's the highest stage or the lowest stage, the worst stage we've ever hit in the history of our water shortages?
So the highest stage that we've implemented so far has, and the stages have changed a little bit over time, but it was a mandatory 20% reduction, and that was during the last drought in 2013 through 2016, end of 13 through 16.
So that's ballpark is stage 3?
Yes, I think at the time it was stage 2. So.
Okay. And just to put it into context, our current drought, it's been the driest year in decades, correct?
So last year was the third driest year on record. And so far this year, we're tracking under that rainfall pattern, correct?
Great, thank you. And then one other question I had was way back on slide 4 during Kimberly's presentation. Has the state of California enacted any assistance for this, similar to what they did with the eviction moratorium? Where, you know, our city attorney did an awesome job explaining that one, where landlords could receive 80% if they waived the other 20%. Is there anything like that with the water shortages?
Can you answer that, or
please go forth?
Okay. So far what we are seeing are relief packages that are coming out that are kind of restrictive. They mostly call out rental and not owner occupied homes. So that creates a bit of an issue, and we're making comments back to the different agencies that are providing some relief. They also have made the relief for utility bills. So not just water at this point, but for utility bills. And so far the math is coming out that the rental assistance will take up all funding that is becoming available before it ever gets to the utility bill phase. But we continue to work with making responses and comment on all of that, and so do all of the national water associations to try to work towards working on getting more relief actually related straight to the water bill.
Great, thank you for that. You know, and the reason I make that comment, just sharing the current condition of the state's budget and how robust it is, it seems like there's an opportunity to assist some of these issues that we just discussed today. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I will also do a quick shout out to Senator Bill Dodd, who I know has worked quite a bit on the low income assistance program for rate users. And I understand that he has an additional bill this year that I'll bring more information back to council on as we have details to help with some of that aspect as well, supporting folks who are struggling. Who else has questions? Councilmember Tibbetts.
Thank you. I guess this would be a question for Director Burke. Help to Others program, what is the income threshold for that? If my memory serves, it was pretty low.
You are taxing my memory. It is for low income, and I can get the council the income numbers. They were just updated, but it really is for low income customers, so it's focused. And so that's been part of the issue that we're dealing with in terms of trying to help folks impacted by COVID. Not all qualify because of their income. And so Help to Others really is focused on very low and low income. And I'll get you that. I apologize, I don't have that at my fingertips.
No worries, and I'll just make my comments now to spare everyone later. I just want to say thank you and to Bob Reed and your staff. I mean, that was a really, really fleshed out presentation. I had really no questions after it. You know, we always hate to see those rates go up, but with uncertainty coming out of Sonoma water, compounded by, as Tom pointed out, it's probably going to be the worst drought we've ever had. I think it's the right direction. I also want to thank Kimberly for thinking about essentially the partial payment plan. We're doing that with our tenants right now, and it's St. Vincent de Paul where I work, and you know, I think that's going to be the best way to get people, you know, working on their own financial timeline. So the fact that the department is able to work with that and absorb that, you know, I appreciate it. As far as Help to Others is concerned, Director Burke, if you could get us that information, or at least me, I'm curious about what that is. I know we use cell phone tower revenue and some other odd revenue sources to fund it back in, I think it was 2015 or something. But you know, one thing that I may ask for, and I'll just go ahead and ask for it now in this budget, is looking at when this comes back for the public hearing in May. Is there any room to try to look at some of those revenue sources that are non-ratepayer money, which is Prop 218 bound, as I understand it? But looking at if that help to others threshold can be elevated at all. And the reason why I ask is, you know, I'm looking at houses for sale in Sonoma County these days, and 800 square foot bungalows are, you know, $550,000. I'm just kind of like, well, if we're going off of the Social Security low income threshold of, you know, which is basically nothing, those people probably don't live in Santa Rosa anyways. I hate to say it, but we may want to look at trying to get to a more reasonable place for where our residents might be in terms of what their cash flow is every month. And thanks again.
Thank you, Councilmember Tibbetts. We will definitely get that information. I'm trying to see if it's going to scramble up as we're sitting here in terms of those income levels. Looks like we might have those in just a second.
I don't know what the percentage is, but it is in line with the housing programs that we run. So a single person household is at $39,800 a year. So very low. And it goes up to a 6-person household at $65,900.
That's actually admittedly a lot better than I thought. So that makes me feel better. But if there is headroom for the next presentation and the plan, definitely brownie points from me, but thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Councilmember Tibbetts. And I will just say, yes, it is cell phone tower revenue. That's really the only revenue base that we do have to use for this particular program that isn't bound by Prop 218 or other constraints. And we are continuing and continuously do look at that program. We had actually expanded the amount of support we gave to our customers. So we increased the discount to actually provide for the entire fixed charge just more recently in the last year and a half to really help kind of make those dollars go further for those folks that are participating in the program.
Councilmember Sawyer.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mayor. And I apologize to the council and the mayor for being tardy. It was not intentional, but unavoidable. I do have a question. It's kind of a reality check. So I know that a lot of people over the last few years have been removing lawns, putting in drought tolerant plants, going to drip systems. I know I've done those same things, and really probably pretty close to my minimum water usage, assuming I don't let plants start to die. Is that kind of what we might be faced with if we move to the higher tiers, unless the water department can come out and assess your endeavors to try to reduce your water use? Is that indeed what we might be faced with, is actually losing plant material even though they're on a drip? Because unless they want to pay the overage fees, that actually the continued reduction in use is the only way to keep those water bills lower, is actually loss of what we might call expendable plant material.
So Councilmember Sawyer, it's a great question, and we will be coming to the council with a full study session on our urban water management plan and our urban water shortage contingency plan. And we'll be proposing what the allocation amounts would be, what the cutbacks would be. It is a little, just the way the timing has worked out, because we are doing a Prop 218 notice, we have to Prop 218 notice the water shortage charges. So the item that we're talking about today is really just the charges. So we will do a full study session with the council in the coming months on the rest of the plan. But in essence, when we're looking at those higher stages, there is minimal to no allocation for landscape. So, but there are opportunities, and we can always provide tips and tools and look at other options. There may be gray water or other things that folks may want to consider.
Well, I appreciate that. And I want to thank you. It was a great presentation. And I know you worked very, very hard to try to keep the impact on our community as low as possible. And we'll just hope we don't get into those other tiers. But, you know, we are faced with a big challenge this year and going into the future. So I know you did the best you could, and I look forward to that study session or the next steps, if you will, in allowing the community to gain gain the reality of really what we're faced with in the city of Santa Rosa. So thank you.
Councilmember Alvarez.
Thank you, Mayor. First and foremost, thank you for the presentation. It's very thorough. Secondly, my appointee, Mark Walsh, speaks very highly of the BPU. So, and that's a hard thing to do. So congratulations. In regards to the outreach, I know that the billing comes both in English and Spanish. Are we also doing that with the video? I must admit, I have not seen the video, and as well as the radio ads.
We actually reach out on Spanish radio. So yeah, we make sure that we publish most of our materials in English and in Spanish. And so we make sure that on our website as well, that it's available in both ways also.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions from council? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we'll go to public comment. If you're interested in providing comment on this item today, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature on your Zoom. All right, Stephanie, I'm not seeing any. Did we have any voicemail public comments?
We had no voicemail public comments on item 3.1.
Okay, we'll go ahead and bring it back to council then. Is there any further direction that you need, Director?
So I think we have the direction we need. It sounds like there were no unanswered questions. So we will be going forth with putting out the Prop 218 notice, and then we will be coming back to council on May 25th.
Okay, that sounds great.
Thank you all so much.
Council, we don't start our formal meeting until 4 o'clock. So we're gonna actually take a little bit of a recess here, and we'll come back at 4 o'clock for the rest of the meeting. All right, Madam City Clerk, it looks like it's 4 o'clock and I see a quorum of the council. Let's go ahead and resume our meeting. Would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Councilmember Tibbetts,
Here.
Councilmember Schwedhelm,
Here.
Councilmember Sawyer,
Here.
Councilmember Fleming, Councilmember Alvarez,
Present.
Vice Mayor Rogers,
Present.
Mayor Rogers,
Here.
Councilmember Fleming, have you joined us? Okay, let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Fleming.
Great, thank you so much. We don't have any closed session to talk about today. We have no proclamations. So Mr. City Manager, let's start with staff briefings.
And we only have one staff briefing this evening. That's item 7.2, and I will turn it over to Mr. Paul Lowenthal.
Good evening, Mayor Rogers, Vice Mayor Rogers, member of the council. Quick update tonight for the glass fire. Just 3 quick items. One, happy to report the open space up in Skyhawk is open, and the final repairs to the pedestrian walking bridge were done. Second thing, we are working towards now a June 1st deadline of having all fire debris removed from the city. The state anticipates completing their debris removal by May 1st. And so our process will be to have all the private debris removal completed by June 1st. And then third and final is a request from the state on messaging to our fire survivors that are still waiting for their state debris removal. We've had reports from several of the other counties that residents are taking it upon themselves to either disturb the ash or move some of the ash around in an effort to start looking at rebuilding options. And unfortunately, it's disqualifying them from the debris removal program. So we will be working with our survivors under our communications team to make sure they get that message and know the state is literally on their way and hope to have their properties cleared soon. And that completes our update for this week.
Thanks, Paul. Any questions from council? Great. Thank you so much. And let us know how we can help amplify that, that push there for the public as well.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. City Manager, let's go on to City Manager, City Attorney reports. You want to start tonight?
I think you need to ask if there's public comment on 7.2.
Yeah, thank you. I always forget that on the staff, the staff updates. Do we have any public comment on our one staff update tonight? And that's the glass fire, or excuse me, the COVID, yes, glass fire recovery update that we just heard from Paul. All right, Madam City Clerk, do we have any voicemails?
We received no voice message public comments on this item.
Right. We'll go ahead and bring it back. Now, Mr. City Manager, item 8.
Item 8, there is no city manager report this evening.
Okay, and Madam City Attorney?
I have nothing to report as well. Thank you.
Great. Item 9, Council, do we have any statements of abstention? Councilmember Tibbetts?
I'm going to have to abstain from item 12.5, declaration of homeless emergency. Benefits of that program reach into my professional life.
Okay. Are there any others from the council? Great. We'll go on to mayors and council members' reports. Who wants to start? Let's go ahead and start with Councilmember Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one item. We had a continuum of care meeting on February 24th. One or a couple of significant items of interest. We were scheduled to make some funding decisions, which included pretty much across the board 30% cuts or some more strategic cuts in specific programs, which would have had dire consequences, in my opinion. But during the agenda item, the CDC received confirmation from the California Department of Housing and Community Development of an award notification of approximately $4.9 million, which can go towards emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and administration. Based on that confirmation of the funding coming to Sonoma County, we continue the item until our next meeting, which will be next week on March 10th. Additionally, we're starting forming some committees. 5 committees were identified and we're starting to accept applications for those. There's an ad hoc continuing care program evaluation committee, an HMIS, Homeless Management Information System Data Committee, a coordinated entry advisory committee, a lived experience committee, and a charter/strategic planning committee. I'll be applying to participate in that last one, the charter and strategic planning committee. And that'll do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Council Member. Madam Vice Mayor?
I would like to make a few appointments today. I'll be appointing Candace Richardson for the Community Advisory Board, the at-large position, and Damian Square for the additional position, and Elias Pennant. Sorry, I practiced that name, so I have to say it right, for the Measure O Citizen Oversight Committee. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. So I've got a couple of appointments that I'm going to make tonight as well. I think over the last few weeks, one of the most substantial conversations that we've been hearing from our community is in response to the study session that we had on the Bennett Valley Golf Course. One of the primary concerns that I and staff heard was that there was no RFP for this process as it moved forward. And so taking a step back and then talking with the city manager and other staff members, we thought that it would be prudent to appoint an ad hoc committee that will specifically look at the scope of services in an RFP and then bring an RFP for public discussion to the council and a discussion of whether or not we'd like to continue on in that process. Councilmember Sawyer has agreed to chair the ad hoc committee. Council members Tibbetts and Alvarez have also agreed to participate. So thank you very much for your service. For folks in the public, what that means is that these three council members will work with Assistant City Manager Jason Nutt to talk about what they've heard from the public to help craft the scope of what that RFP will look like. And then we'll be able to have a study session here at the council level, and the public will be invited to weigh in on what that RFP looks like. And then that'll be a touch point for council to see if we want to continue to advance that conversation, or if we've heard substantially from the community and are ready to go a different direction. So council members, thank you for your willingness to serve on that committee. I also want to report out to the council. We had our first League of Cities Legislative Committee over the last couple of months. We just had our first one this last week. I was elected as the chair of that entity, working on legislation. We are now past the bill introduction deadline, and though every member was asked to keep their bill loads to only about 12 bills apiece, we ended up with thousands of them still to comb through. So I'll be bringing back to this group things of interest that I think that you should look into or let you know when we've taken positions on legislation as it moves forward. Lots of them are still in spot bill form, so I'm not going to get too far into most of them, but I did want to highlight for the council actually regulations that are being proposed by the Board of Forestry, just to keep an eye on. The latest draft of the new fire management plans that are out there for development actually have a couple of different components that will impact some of our conversations around recovery. One is a proposed moratorium on any rebuild of a fire destroyed home if it is served by a road that is smaller than 14 feet across. And so when it's in the wild and urban interface, I'll be talking with staff to see if and how many of those we have, but there are certainly some in Sonoma County. The other is a requirement that local jurisdictions work with fire professionals to identify ridgeways of strategic importance, whether from topographical elements or from a fire management standpoint. And then those ridge tops would also likewise be banned from any type of development moving forward as well. Happy to answer any questions on that. I'll keep folks in the loop. And I do know, having talked with the city manager, that he and the fire marshals in our fire department are tracking this pretty closely and will keep us informed on it as well. Councilmember Tibbetts.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think you said you were going to do this, but it would be great to get some of those key legislative bills that are being proposed by the league to come in a study session. that was really interesting about the Board of Forestry issue.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely bring some of that forward, council member. And one of the things that we also have talked about doing through that entity that we talked about at the council as well is when we get further in the year, doing a more global goal setting of all of the jurisdictions to talk about what our legislative needs are, so that way we have our own policy platforms that we've developed to try to give advance notice to our members of the delegation prior to them putting together and introducing their own legislation throughout the year. Any other questions? Okay, then we will move on. We have no minutes tonight. Let's go ahead and go to our consent items. Item 12, Mr. City Manager.
Item 12.1, resolution approval for 2 purchase orders to Alltech Industries Incorporated for the purchase of 3 Alltech hybrid aerial trucks under a Sourcewell cooperative agreement. Item 12.2, resolution authorizing submittal of grant application to the State of California Department of Parks and Recreation Division of Boating and Waterways for boating program safety equipment at Lake Ralphine and Howarth Park. Item 12.3, resolution extension of proclamation of local emergency relating to the threat to the community health posed by COVID-19. Item 12.4, resolution extension of proclamation of existence of a local emergency relating to 2020 glass fire. Item 12.5, resolution extension of proclamation of local homeless emergency.
Okay, Council, do we have any questions on the consent calendar? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to public comment. Is there any public comment on our consent calendar for tonight? I'm not seeing any live public comment. Madam City Clerk, were there any voicemails?
There were no voicemails received for item 12 consent calendar.
Okay, go ahead, bring it back. Madam Vice Mayor, this is your item.
I move items 12.1 through 12.4 and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
So moved by the Vice Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Sweathelm. Let's go ahead and call the roll.
Councilmember Tibbetts?
Aye.
Councilmember Schwedhelm?
Aye.
Councilmember Sawyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Alvarez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Rogers?
Aye.
Mayor Rogers.
Aye.
That motion passes with 6 ayes with Councilmember Fleming absent.
All right, Madam Vice Mayor.
I move item 12.5 and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
All right, motion in a second. Let's go ahead and call the roll.
Councilmember Schwedhelm?
Aye.
Councilmember Sawyer?
Aye.
Councilmember Alvarez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Rogers?
Aye.
Mayor Rogers.
Aye.
That motion passes with 5 ayes with Councilmember Tibbetts recusing and Councilmember Fleming absent.
Okay. Now, Council, we don't have any report items or public hearings. Madam City Attorney, I do believe we have to wait until 5 o'clock to do our public comment. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay, then we will recess until 5 o'clock and we'll come back for public comment for items not on the agenda. All right, Madam City Clerk, I have us at 5 o'clock. I see a quorum of the council. Let's go ahead and call the roll.
Okay, Councilmember Tibbetts,
Here.
Councilmember Schwedhelm,
Here.
Councilmember Sawyer,
Here.
Councilmember Fleming, Councilmember Alvarez,
Present.
Vice Mayor Rogers,
Present.
Mayor Rogers,
Here.
Councilmember Fleming, have you joined us? Okay, let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Fleming.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming back, Council, and for being here. We have one item left on our agenda. That's public comment for non-agenda items. If you're interested in providing a public comment tonight, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature on your Zoom. You'll have 3 minutes to address the council. Due to the Brown Act, we can't get into a back and forth discussion about items that haven't been agendized, but we can definitely take that back for future discussion and ask staff to respond as appropriately. With that, I see first hand up is Sheila. Sheila, we're gonna go ahead and unmute you and you'll have 3 minutes to address the council.
Great, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Terrific. Good evening, council members. Thank you for your time this evening. On behalf of the over 3,600 plus members and growing of the Save Bennett Valley Golf Course and Recreational Area Group, we are asking for a council vote now, not a delay to the summer, to rescind the authorization to the city manager to prepare the $150,000 proposed contract with CBRE. As you already know, many residents of our city within your districts do not want this contract. The time and money could be better spent. A yes vote will only reinforce the view that the city council is not really engaging with its constituents. As you yourselves have shared, time is of the essence to resolve the fiscal issues you've stated, and there's a need to put the plan in place for the contract close coming up with the current operator, July 2022. Your choice to stop the CVR contract will allow for collaboration between your residents and the city council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on public comment? Okay, Madam City Clerk, did we have any voicemail public comments?
Yes, Mayor, we have 3 voice message public comments that I will play now.
Okay.
Greetings. My name is Lynn Fitzpatrick, and I am addressing agenda item 13. My topic is paying for parking is killing our downtown and is supported by the documents I emailed last week. Last month, I visited ASEF's appliance repair on 4th Street at 10:30 in the morning to pick up a lamp I had delivered for repair. When I parked in front of ASEF's, my car was the only one on the entire block. After a brief transaction, I returned to my car on that street, still completely devoid of other vehicles, to find a parking ticket on the windshield and the parking enforcer running away. I couldn't believe it. Our downtown is struggling, yet you discouraged those of us who are trying to patronize local shops by requiring us to pay to park even when all the other spaces are empty. Our neighbors in Hillsburg understand this. They allow up to 3 hours of free parking using a robust license plate reader system. Tourists and local citizens who would like to patronize their hometown merchants can do so easily and without also paying to park. And city employees remain employed. They are license plate readers instead of meter watchers. An urban myth exists that merchants support paid parking meters. So I walked the several blocks of 4th Street between Mendocino and E Streets and interviewed merchants and employees. Sadly, 11 storefronts on just those blocks are empty. Out of the 24 storefronts interviewed, 19 opposed parking meters vehemently. 3 supported them, and 2 others advocated for 30 to 60 minutes of free parking in front of their stores. Interestingly, merchants discouraged me from wasting my time on this. They don't believe you will do anything to solve it. Additionally, I opened a comment stream on Nextdoor, inviting neighbors to describe their experiences shopping and dining in Santa Rosa. Generally, they don't go anymore. It's not COVID. They can park for free in Montgomery Village or Cottingtown, so they have found other places to spend their money. And they don't believe you will do anything about this either. We've all seen too many ghost downtowns to wish that on our Santa Rosa. And with COVID and 11 empty storefronts in just the 2 blocks I walked, this is not an empty threat. You have the opportunity to breathe life back into our downtown. Let's suspend those parking meters. Let's get those parking spaces filled again. Let's begin working on a long-term solution to parking downtown that involves all constituent voices. Let's revive our downtown right now when it needs us the most.
Hi, my name is Nikit Bhatia. It's a pleasure to be here in front of the mayor and city council. I'm actually a resident of Charlotte, but I have a lot of family in California. The reason I'm here today is because citizens across California have, in high volume, requested that we raise awareness in their home state with their local and state government. So, dear citizens of Santa Rosa, you were being donated a free trial of our police body camera analytics software. This is a free, no obligation, 60-day trial to evaluate cutting-edge new technology to improve policing in the state of California. These trials are only being offered to a select group of cities around the U.S. as a donation from Amazon and Green Key to help improve policing in this country. The purpose of this free trial is to process 1 year's worth of police body camera data and to generate a respectfulness report. A respectfulness report will give you the data to understand what percentage of police interactions are positive, whether racial bias exists at your PD, which de-escalation tactics and officers are most effective in the field, and much more. This report and our findings are confidential and will remain the property of your city and police department. The problem today is that less than 0.1% of your body camera data is being analyzed, despite the fact that this data can provide valuable insight into how to actually improve policing. At the end of the day, we believe that police are in the customer service business, and the same way when you call a customer service center and they say this line is recorded for quality and assurance purposes, we believe that should be mandated for police as well. So again, this is a free, no obligation trial to give you greater visibility into the everyday interactions of your police department and constituents. Our software can also help you to reduce cloud storage costs by significantly replacing low-risk files such as routine traffic stops with smaller versions and or transcripts of the interaction. Thus, we will reduce your city budget if you were to adopt this technology after your 60-day free trial. But I'll stop there. I'd like to thank you all for your time. City Council and Mayor, I really appreciate it. Please contact me at nikhit@greenkeytech.com if you would like to accept this donation or have any follow-up questions. I'll personally reach out to each of you and would love to schedule a follow-up call. Thank you and have a good day.
Hi, this is Eris Weaver from the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. My comment is from agenda item number 13. Well, we're fairly neutral as to whether or how the city and the county decide to collaborate on constructing a shared civic center. We agree with Supervisor Rabbitt's statement in yesterday's paper that it's a huge project, a generational thing. You want to make sure you do it right and look at everything. And for that reason, I and other advocates for sustainable transportation are a little concerned about how many times parking for private automobiles was mentioned as a concern in that story. Both the city and the county have adopted climate action plans. You both profess a desire to reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions, so you should be doing everything in your power to discourage private automobile use and set a good example with your own facilities. Research shows that when parking is free and plentiful, more people will drive. providing publicly funded storage for private property has become outdated, counterproductive, and unsustainable. So a shared civic center downtown would be convenient to both the bus and the train stations. By reducing parking and adding other incentives like discounted or free Clipper cards, really excellent bike parking and showers, reserved parking for carpools only, flexible hours, things like that, would encourage workers to use alternative transportation, which would also increase the demand for those other forms of transportation and therefore investment in them. So as you consider your next moves about moving City Hall, the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition encourages you to stop reducing in outdated infrastructure like private parking and instead invest more in supporting getting people to work using transit and other forms of active transportation in congruence with your stated climate goals. Thank you.
Mayor, that concludes voice message public comments on non-agenda matters.
Great. Thank you so much, Dina. That's the last item that we had tonight. So we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting. See you all in a couple of weeks.